Wah wah. One sunny morning, as I stepped outside to take out the trash, I heard a baby crying in the garden.
A baby?
At first, I thought it was just a neighbor's baby and smiled, but as I listened more carefully, it seemed to be coming from within our property. Panicked, I rushed to the garden. There, in the middle of the lawn, was an abandoned basket. The baby's cries seemed to be coming from inside the basket. I cautiously peeked inside, and there I found a newborn baby and a letter saying,
"Please take care of this child."
I couldn't grasp the situation, so I picked up the basket and headed towards the entrance, but in my haste, I almost stumbled. I managed to stay on my feet and started running again. Then,
"Police! Call the police!"
I shouted from the doorway, trying to get the attention of my son, James, and his wife, Isabella. But no matter how much I yelled, there was no sign of either of them coming out. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed the cordless handset from the entrance. As I was about to call the police,
"Mom, wait!"
I stopped in my tracks, shocked, and turned to see James standing there with a guilty look on his face. "James, do you know anything about this baby?" "My name is Sophia. I just turned 50 this year and am a housewife. I had a hard time with my ex-husband Lucas, but now I live peacefully. I live in a two-family house with James and Isabella, and not only am I close to James, but I also have a very good relationship with Isabella, to the point where we can share our grievances with each other. People in the neighborhood often say that Isabella and I seem like real mother and daughter. From the sincere way Isabella behaved when we first met, I was confident that we would get along well, and it has turned out exactly as I had hoped. We enjoy cooking dinner together, going shopping together, and even when we split tasks for efficiency, we know each other's habits so well that it's a breeze. We might be a kind of best partners, different from a married couple, but equally close. Usually, in our two-family house, I use the west side and James and Isabella use the east side, so we don't hear each other's daily noises much. But for New Year celebrations, Christmas, birthdays, and other events, we open up the hallway in the middle and celebrate together. We set up a big table and lay out a variety of dishes that Isabella and I prepare, turning it into a mini party. Both Isabella and I love cooking, so we can prepare colorful dinners that look like they're from a restaurant. Isabella often posts pictures of our party table on social media, and the neighbors enjoy seeing them and leave positive comments, which makes us very happy. However, I've noticed that Isabella hasn't seemed well lately. On sunny mornings, we usually chat about trivial things while hanging out the laundry, but this morning was different.
"Good morning, Isabella. I heard cabbage is on sale today. Why don't we go shopping together and make stuffed cabbage rolls? James likes them, doesn't he?"
"I'm sorry, Sophia. I can't today." Before I could finish speaking, Isabella closed the window and stayed in her room all day. This happened a few more times, so I decided to find a moment when we could talk alone. "Isabella, you don't seem to be doing well lately. Is something wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then wore a troubled expression.
"Actually, it's really hard to say."
And she started explaining that James had been going out a lot lately and coming home late. According to Isabella, he used to always inform her if he was going to eat out, but recently, he hasn't been doing even that and sometimes comes home in the morning, which has been troubling her. Having experienced infidelity with Lucas in the past, a sense of foreboding ran down my spine, but I kept silent, not wanting to make Isabella anxious. However, Isabella continued.
"I hate to say this to you, Sophia, but there were times he came back smelling of unfamiliar perfume or I found an earring in his coat pocket."
Hearing this, I knew my suspicions weren't unfounded. I wanted to support Isabella as much as possible. Even though James is my son, anyone who hurts others should not be prioritized. Isabella always prepares nutritionally balanced meals for James, ensures his clothes are in order so he won't be embarrassed at work, and does the household chores diligently. Nobody would want to see her sad or suffering. I hugged her from behind, patting her shoulder rhythmically, while my anger towards James grew. A few days later, I went to put out the trash and saw James coming home. He seemed quite drunk, probably from drinking with his colleagues.
James, have you been eating properly at home? You shouldn't drink so much and risk your health.
James scratched his right ear and said, "Yeah, I know. I've just been busy lately." His response lacked sincerity, and he didn't meet my eyes. At that moment, he probably didn't realize that I noticed him repeatedly touching his right ear. This was an old habit of his whenever he was lying or feeling guilty. In other words, he was aware of doing something wrong and wanted to hide it. Feeling very disappointed, I sighed. Sigh. James, shaking his shoulders, raised his voice.
I've been busy with events and gatherings. You know, the usual ones.
He quickly went to their living space. There was definitely something suspicious. Is it a mother's intuition? No, it's a woman's intuition. Despite being my own son, I was filled with a mix of anger and sadness at his shallow behavior, but I needed to focus on what I could do to avoid hurting Isabella. Having married someone like Isabella, who can do anything for others, it was unthinkable for me to abandon her. A week later, as I was hanging the laundry in the garden as usual, Isabella opened the curtains and called out to me with the window wide open.
Sophia, good morning.
Isabella seemed to have a refreshed expression. I was curious about the reason for this change, but I greeted her casually for the moment.
Would you like to go out for lunch if you have time?
She invited me out for a meal. I was relieved to see Isabella cheerful and readily accepted her invitation. Around noon, we went to a nearby large shopping mall together. We entered a restaurant known for its delicious Chinese food and started discussing the event that had ended last week. I had heard many praises from around town about Isabella's work at the event. People appreciated her thoughtfulness and said she was very helpful with her pleasant personality and willingness to assist with anything. Even the event organizers told me how grateful they were for her help. When I relayed this to Isabella, she looked very embarrassed but was genuinely happy to receive such compliments. I was very relieved to see Isabella's cheerful expression and tried to continue with positive topics. By the way, have you talked to James since then? She suddenly asked. After the event, we had a talk once, and I felt a bit relieved. James has been going out less, she said, looking happy, and took another bite of her food. Seeing Isabella enjoying her meal made me feel relieved, but knowing James' personality, I knew I had to keep an eye on the situation. Like Lucas, James is also unusually good at lying. Isabella is perceptive and smart, so it's hard to imagine her being easily deceived by James' lies, but it's better to stay cautious. After finishing our lunch, we did some shopping for daily necessities and groceries at the large shopping mall, and then we went our separate ways. On my way back home alone, I couldn't stop thinking about James' behavior and decided to recall the events in detail. First, the increase in his night outings, which I learned from Isabella. She looked like she had been struggling for more than just a few days. Next, James' attitude, his expressions clearly showed guilt, along with his pronounced habit of touching his right ear. Could the situation really have improved so much in just 1 or 2 weeks for Isabella to look that cheerful? It hadn't been that way for me, so I started to investigate discreetly, asking people around if they had noticed any changes in James' recent behavior. However, the townspeople didn't seem to encounter James often, and I couldn't gather much useful information. All I got were occasional sightings at the supermarket or nearby stores. In the end, I reluctantly started observing James from our backyard, lightly keeping an eye on his actions. Several weeks had passed since I began observing James. One sunny morning, as I went outside to take out the trash, wah wah, I heard a baby crying in the garden.
A baby?
At first, I thought it was just a neighbor's baby and smiled, but as I listened more carefully, it seemed to be coming from within our property. Panicked, I rushed to the garden. There, in the middle of the lawn, was an abandoned basket. The baby's cries seemed to be coming from inside the basket. I cautiously peeked inside, and there I found a newborn baby and a letter saying,
"Please take care of this child."
I couldn't grasp the situation, so I picked up the basket and headed towards the entrance, but in my haste, I almost stumbled. I managed to stay on my feet and started running again. Then,
"Police! Call the police!"
I shouted from the doorway, trying to get the attention of James and Isabella. But no matter how much I yelled, there was no sign of either of them coming out. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed the cordless handset from the entrance. As I was about to call the police,
"Mom, wait!"
I stopped in my tracks, shocked, and turned to see James standing there with a guilty look on his face. "James, do you know anything about this baby?" I approached James, out of breath and confused. However, James only frowned and refused to answer. Unable to comprehend James' attitude and becoming increasingly confused, I saw Isabella walking over with a cold expression, saying,
"James, you can tell her now."
Her voice, cold unlike her usual gentle and reliable self, made me more confused.
"Huh? What do you mean?"
I asked, still bewildered. James began to speak hesitantly. First, he said that the baby left in the basket in the garden is the result of an affair between James and Mia, a married woman living nearby. In other words, he cheated. Surprisingly, he has been having an affair with Mia since the dinner party at last year's event, and they continued their relationship until she became pregnant. I collapsed on the spot, with my hand on my head. How could I ever apologize to Isabella for my son's disgraceful actions? Isabella's words were surely meant to keep me from being shocked or troubled. I think highly of Isabella's depth of kindness, always thinking of others even in such times, but I also wished she would put herself first at least now. Seeing me stand there speechless, Isabella momentarily showed a look of regret and said, "Sophia, I'm sorry. Actually." Before she could finish, I instinctively hugged her. It was filled with a desire not to see her hurt anymore and a deep sense of guilt for the pain James had caused her. "Isabella, I'm so sorry. You've been through so much." Isabella stopped speaking in surprise and accepted my embrace. I turned to James once more and, with anger in a firm voice, said,
"You should be the one to take responsibility and explain it."
Realizing that he had no allies left in the house, James reluctantly began to speak, detailing how it all started.
"At first, we were just friends meeting at dinner parties, but as we continued to have meals together, we started to look at each other differently."
He explained that they began going out after seeing each other by chance at a cafe. Apparently, Mia often talked about her problems with her husband, Elijah, and as James listened to her troubles, he started feeling the need to protect her. It would have been better if he could have maintained a friendship, but before he knew it, he had fallen for her. James spoke with a gloomy face. From my perspective, these excuses were meaningless. The undeniable fact was before us, and he should have faced it more sincerely. I felt embarrassed that my son had grown into such a shameful adult. Even at this stage, James tried to imply that the fault was not entirely his. As I pondered this, I suddenly realized that it was impossible for a wife to be pregnant and give birth without her family noticing the changes. What explanation could Mia have given to Elijah?
I get the gist of it. And I also understand that you've acted incredibly foolishly. By the way, what's the situation with Mia and Elijah?
There was no point in beating around the bush anymore, so I decided to be direct. It is impossible to hide a pregnancy, and having a baby without the child being there wouldn't make sense. There had to be some sort of discussion, or maybe Elijah was unaware of the affair. After a pause, James reluctantly said,
Elijah thinks the baby is his.
From his expression, it was clear James believed the baby was his own. But I also considered the possibility that the child could be Mia and Elijah's. To settle this, I decided to conduct a DNA test for the baby and James later. But first, we needed to address the immediate issue, the baby, in front of us. It wouldn't be right for Isabella to take care of the child, and maybe I should take on that responsibility. The child is innocent. But having James a fair child in the same living space could be a huge burden for Isabella. I also wondered if James had shown any genuine remorse or apology to Isabella. Questions kept flooding my mind, making it hard to think straight. I felt utterly lost about what to do. James is my son, and Isabella is like a daughter to me. With their relationship shattered, I couldn't choose sides. As someone who had experienced infidelity, I couldn't forgive such behavior. Yet, I didn't know if Isabella would want me, James' mom, to side with her. I had to find out directly. With both of them watching, I finally gathered my thoughts and beckoned Isabella, saying,
Isabella, can we talk privately?
Isabella nodded, walked past James, and came straight to me. I gestured to James to look after the baby, then led Isabella to my room. The moment we entered, Isabella apologized.
Sophia, I'm sorry for lying.
I quickly responded,
There's no need for you to apologize. Please, don't.
I guided her to a chair, making her sit down. I realized that I had been spending more time with Isabella than with James, and I genuinely enjoyed those moments. My priority now was to support her.
Isabella, I don't know if it's right to say this, but you are like a daughter to me. I want to be on your side. Will you allow me to do so?
Isabella looked up at me, surprised.
I will make sure James takes full responsibility. And in the meantime, I want to support you in any way you need.
When I said this, Isabella's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. We decided that I would primarily take care of the baby, with Isabella helping occasionally. Despite the baby being James and Mia's child, Isabella showed incredible love and care for the baby. It made me resent James even more for his actions. We proceeded with the DNA test, which confirmed that James was indeed the father. Armed with the test results, we headed to Mia's house. When I rang the doorbell, Mia appeared at the door, and upon seeing us, her face turned pale, and she tried to close the door. This reaction confirmed her guilt. I instinctively held the door she was trying to close and said,
You know what we need to talk about, right?
Pressing her to have a discussion. Sensing our determination, Mia scowled at the ground before reluctantly inviting us in. The house was spacious and filled with expensive decorations, indicating a life of affluence. Not wanting to cause any damage, I decided to deal with the matter in the foyer. I pulled out the envelope and held it up to her eye level. Mia seemed to understand that we knew about the baby, showing no sign of surprise. She took the envelope without a word and then, unexpectedly, confronted us.
What do you expect from me?
I couldn't back down for Isabella's sake.
What were you planning to do with the baby, leaving it at our house? What else could I do? I can't introduce Elijah to the baby. So, you haven't told Elijah anything? Elijah has been on a solo assignment since before my pregnancy showed, so he doesn't know about it.
I was stunned. Everything had fallen into place so conveniently for her. Elijah was completely unaware of Mia's pregnancy and the baby's existence. Despite my sympathy for Elijah, James had to take responsibility for his child. We firmly handed the envelope to Mia. "We're leaving this to you. Explain everything and take responsibility." With that, we left Mia's house. The next day, Saturday morning, our doorbell rang loudly. We were awakened by the sound and gathered at the entrance, rubbing our sleepy eyes. I opened the door to find a crying Mia and Elijah standing there. They entered without hesitation and immediately threw documents at James, demanding,
"What is the meaning of this?"
Faced with the imposing and tall Elijah, James was visibly intimidated, shrinking back in fear. Elijah, realizing that James was not going to be of much help, turned to me with a slightly softened tone.
"Could you please explain this?"
I had nothing to hide, so I explained everything in detail. Elijah's face turned pale, and he bowed his head to Isabella, sincerely apologizing.
"I am truly sorry for what Mia has done."
Isabella's eyes widened in surprise.
"I am considering divorcing Mia. Have you made any decisions yourself?"
His directness took me aback, and I realized that I hadn't properly discussed with Isabella whether she wanted to divorce James. Looking at Isabella, she met Elijah's gaze firmly and declared,
"I have already signed the divorce papers with James. I have no intention of living with him anymore, and this decision has been discussed and agreed upon."
Hearing Isabella's words, Elijah nodded.
"Understood. Then, I will proceed through my lawyer to formally claim compensation and settlement in the divorce court. I recommend you also seek what you are rightfully owed, without letting emotions sway you."
With that, he pulled Mia's arm and left quickly. Later, after officially divorcing James, Isabella continued to live with me. Unable to forgive James for doing the same thing as Lucas, I decided to cut ties with him. When I suggested that Isabella live in this house, she accepted with a hint of hesitation. Isabella and I began living together. True to his word, Elijah demanded a hefty settlement from James. Isabella also claimed the legally mandated settlement from Mia, leaving James unable to live a normal life. He had to start from scratch, finding a new place to live, while being burdened with debt and child-rearing responsibilities. This ordeal made it clear that dishonest people face the consequences of their actions. However, recognizing that the child was innocent, Isabella set the condition that James could rely on her if he was ever truly in need regarding childcare. I was deeply moved by Isabella's unwavering compassion, even in such times. Having been accepted by Isabella, I was determined to protect her from any future unhappiness as long as I could. If this would serve as atonement for the past infidelities, I would continue to do so forever.